The day the bank padlocked the gate on 600 acres her family had farmed for 90 years. A 17-year-old girl was the only one who noticed the barn wall had been built 2 feet too thick. Nobody in Marshall County, Iowa thought Hannah Reed had a prayer. She was 17. She drove a rusted-out 1989 pickup that only started if you prayed over it first. And the morning the men from Cedar Valley Trust drove up the lane in 2 clean SUVs, she was standing alone on the porch because her grandfather, Walt Reed, had passed in his sleep just 11 days before. The bank said the land was theirs now. A loan Walt supposedly signed back in 2019. 600 acres of black Iowa dirt, the kind of soil people fight wars over, and a barn that had stood since before the Great Depression. All of it gone, on the strength of one piece of paper Hannah had never seen. Hey, race, the thing they didn't know. Walt Reed never trusted banks. Not once in his whole life. And the reason that mattered was hidden inside a wall nobody had opened in 90 years. Stick with me, because what this girl pulled out of that barn didn't just save her farm. It made a room full of lawyers go dead silent. If you've ever been told you're too young, too small, or too late to fight back, you're going to want to see how this ends. Let me back up to where it started, because the whole thing turned on one feeling Hannah couldn't shake. It was a Tuesday in March. The lead man from the bank was named Gerald Foss. And I want you to understand something about Gerald, because it's important. He wasn't cruel. He didn't yell. He brought a folder, he brought a soft voice, and he brought that polite little smile people use when they've already decided you've lost. I know this is hard, he told her, standing in the kitchen where she'd eaten breakfast her whole life. Your grandfather took out a loan against the property. $340,000. It defaulted. He slid the document across the table. There it was. Walt Reed's signature, dated June 14, 2019. And Hannah stared at it, and her stomach turned over, because she knew something Gerald didn't. In June of 2019, her grandfather's hands shook so badly from his tremor that he couldn't sign his own birthday card to her. Shed had to guide his hand. The signature on that loan document was smooth, clean, confident. The signature of a man with steady hands. It was a forgery. She was sure of it. But being sure of something and proving it are 2 different mountains, and Hannah had no money, no lawyer, and 90 days before the foreclosure went final. Hey, race, where her grandfather comes back into the story, even though he was gone. Walt Reed was a quiet man who said the same handful of things over and over, the way old farmers do. And there was one line Head repeated to Hannah since she was small enough to ride on his knee. The land remembers who it belongs to, Head say. Even when the paper forgets. The proof is always in the barn, girl. When she was little, she thought it was just one of Grandpa's sayings. The kind of thing that sounds wise but doesn't really mean anything. Now, sitting alone that night with a forged loan document on the table, she started to wonder if Walt had been telling her something the whole time. So she went out to the barn at midnight with a flashlight. The Reed barn was built in 1934, right in the teeth of the Depression, by Hannah's great-grandfather. It was the kind of structure they don't make anymore, hand-hewn beams, square nails, oak so old it had gone hard as iron. Hannah had been in that barn 10,000 times. But she'd never once measured it. That night she did. And the numbers didn't add up. The barn measured 42 feet across on the outside. But when she paced the inside, wall to wall, she only got 40 feet. 2 feet of barn were missing. Just gone. Swallowed somewhere inside the north wall. She stood there in the dark, heart pounding, and she thought about Walt's voice. The proof is always in the barn. She found a loose board near the bottom of that north wall, the wood worn smooth where a hand had touched it again and again over the years. She got her grandfather's old pry bar. And she pulled. Behind that board was a hollow space, dry as a bone, lined with tar paper to keep the damp out. And inside it sat a flat tin box, the kind that used to hold tobacco, wrapped twice in oilcloth. Her hands were shaking now, the way Walt's used to. Inside that tin box was 90 years of a family refusing to trust the system. There was the original 1934 land deed, the real one, with the raised county seal still crisp. There were tax receipts going back to the Eisenhower years, every single one, paid in full, stamped and dated. There was a hand-drawn map of every field, every drainage tile, every fence line. And there was something else. Something that made Hannah sit down hard on the dusty barn floor. A letter in her grandfather's careful hand, written just 8 months before he died. Back when his hands still worked. It read, in part, "If you're reading this, they've come for the land. They will have a paper with my name on it. I never signed it. Cedar Valley came to me twice trying to get me to borrow against this ground, and I told them no both times. Whatever they show you is a lie. The real deed is right here where my father put his, and his father before him. The land remembers. Hannah had known. Somehow, the old man had known they've come for her, and had left her the one weapon that mattered. Now erase the part nobody tells you. Being right isn't enough. Hannah had the real deed, but Cedar Valley Trust had lawyers, money, and a 90-day clock that was still ticking. She took the tin box to a small-town attorney named Ruth Okafor, a woman who'd spent 30 years doing wills and property lines and not much else. Ruth looked through that box for a long time without saying a word. Then she looked up. What Hannah had was a paper trail. An unbroken chain of ownership and tax payments stretching back to 1934, all of it proving the Reed family had owned that land free and clear, with no mortgage, for 90 straight years. You cannot foreclose on a loan that secures land the borrower didn't even owe money on. And a clean 90-year deed history is very, very hard to argue with. But the forged signature was still the key. Because if that loan was real, the box didn't matter. If it was fake, the bank had a crime on its hands. So Ruth did one simple thing. She requested the original loan document and sent it, along with 3 genuine samples of Walt's shaky 2019 signature, to a forensic handwriting examiner in Des Moines. The meeting happened in a conference room at Cedar Valley Trust on a gray Thursday in May. Gerald Foss was there with that same soft voice and that same polite smile. 2 bank lawyers sat beside him in suits that cost more than Hannah's truck. And across the table sat a 17-year-old girl and a small-town lawyer with a tin box. Gerald started in with his speech about the paperwork being in order. He was halfway through when Ruth Okafor slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the report from the handwriting examiner. And it said, in language no lawyer could wiggle out of, that the signature on the 2019 loan document was not made by the same hand that signed the genuine samples. Then Ruth laid the 1934 deed on the table. Then the 90 years of tax receipts. Then Walt's letter. And the room went quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the clock on the wall. One of the bank lawyers leaned over and whispered to Gerald for a long moment. Gerald's polite smile finally, slowly, came apart. He looked at Hannah, and the man who'd had every answer 11 weeks ago had nothing left. And Hannah looked right back at him and said the only thing that needed saying. In the wall my great-grandfather built so a man like you could never take this land. He knew you'd come. Cedar Valley Trust dropped the foreclosure within a week. They didn't have a choice. The forged signature turned into a criminal referral, and an internal loan officer, a man who'd been quietly faking documents on a dozen elderly farmers across 3 counties, lost a lot more than his job. Hannah's discovery didn't just save her own ground. It cracked open cases for 6 other families who'd already given up. Hannah Reed kept all 600 acres. Every black, beautiful acre. She framed her grandfather's letter and hung it in the kitchen where the bank man once slid a lie across the table. And that hollow space in the barn wall? She didn't seal it back up. She keeps the real deed right there, wrapped in oilcloth, where 4 generations of Reeds have kept it. Because some lessons you don't just learn. You pass them down. The land remembers who it belongs to. And now so does Hannah. If a forgotten box in a barn wall can do all that, wait until you see what this widow found buried under her own kitchen floor.